My mother used to say that my father, General James Peterson, was like an old oak tree. He was tall, solid, and had roots that ran so deep into the earth you'd think he'd been there forever. He wasn't a man of many words, but his presence filled a room. He could command a division of 10,000 soldiers with a quiet look. But he could also melt into a puddle when my mother Eleanor would kiss him on the cheek. When she died, it was like the strongest oak had been struck by lightning. He didn't fall, but a massive part of him was hollowed out, and for the first time in my life, I saw the cracks in his bark. The days after her passing were a blur of casseroles and condolences. Our small Georgia home, usually filled with the scent of my mother's baking and the sound of her laughter, was now thick with the cloying smell of lilies and hushed whispers. Dad moved through it all like a ghost in his own life. He'd nod, shake a hand, accept a hug. But his eyes were a million miles away, back in time with her. I'm Marcus. I'm his son. I didn't follow him into the military. I'm a teacher at the local high school. I have my mother's softer edges, her love for books and quiet conversation. But I have my father's eyes, and right now, they were seeing the world through a haze of grief. I spent those days just trying to be near him, a silent support. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, the same porch where he and Mom would sit for hours, and we'd just watch the fireflies start their nightly dance. She loved the fireflies. He said one night, his voice raspy. It was one of the few full sentences he'd offered up in days. I know, Dad, I said, my own voice thick, said they were like little fallen stars, trying to find their way back to the sky. We sat in that memory for a while. That was my dad, even in his deepest pain. He was a poet in his own quiet way. He wasn't just General Peterson, the four-star legend who had advised presidents and walked through war zones. He was James, the man who loved Eleanor, the father who taught me how to fish and how to be a good man, the uniform, the stars, the accolades, they were just the clothes he wore for work. The man underneath was the one I knew, the one I loved, the one who was breaking apart in front of me. The day of the funeral was heavy and gray, the sky weeping a slow, misty drizzle that clung to everything. The church was packed. It seemed like the whole town came out, plus a procession of men in crisp uniforms, their chests gleaming with medals. They were there for the general's wife, of course, but also for him, a silent, uniformed guard of honor for a fallen leader's greatest loss. Dad sat in the front pew, straight-backed and stoic. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored black suit. No uniform, no medals. Today, he was not a general. He was just a husband saying goodbye. I sat beside him, my sister, Chloe, on his other side. Throughout the service, he stared at the mahogany casket, draped in a blanket of my mother's favorite white roses. He didn't cry, not in the way most people do, but once, during the pastor's eulogy, when he mentioned my mother's infectious laugh, I saw a single tear trace a path down my father's dark cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He let it fall, a lonely soldier on a long march. The procession to the cemetery was long and slow, a river of headlights cutting through the gloom. The cemetery was an old one, set on a rolling hill just outside of town, with ancient oaks that stood like silent mourners. It was where my mother had wanted to be, near her own parents. When we arrived, there was some confusion. The sheer number of cars had overwhelmed the small, grassy parking area. Cars were parked along the narrow lane, making it difficult to get through. The hearse and our family cars made it to the designated spot near the gravesite, but many of the other mourners were struggling. An elderly cousin of my mother's, Aunt Hattie, was in a car behind us, and her driver was having trouble navigating the tight space. Dad, ever the one to take charge and solve a problem, put a hand on my arm. I'll be right back, son. Just going to help Hattie's driver get parked. He got out of the car. He looked so normal. A tall, well-dressed black man in his late 60s, his hair more salt than pepper, his shoulders still broad but slumped just a little with the weight of the day. He walked over to the car and began to speak calmly to the driver, using hand gestures to guide him into a spot on the grass. He was creating order out of the chaos, just like he'd done his whole life. That's when I saw the police cruiser. It pulled up fast, lights flashing, and stopped abruptly. blocking the lane. A young officer got out. He was white, with a buzz cut and a frame that seemed too small for the authority he was trying to project. He had that swagger some young cops get, a mix of nervousness and aggression. He didn't say, "Excuse me, sir." He didn't ask what was going on. He barked, "Hey, you, get out of the road." My father, who was in the middle of directing the car, turned slowly. He looked at the officer, his face unreadable. He probably assumed the officer was just stressed from the traffic situation. "It's all right, officer," Dad said, his voice calm and deep, the voice of command that had steadied nervous young men in far more dangerous situations. "I'm just helping this driver. I don't care what you're doing," the officer snapped, walking towards him, his hand already resting on the butt of his holstered gun. "I said get out of the road. You're blocking traffic and causing a public disturbance." A public disturbance. My mind reeled. We were at a funeral. My father was helping an old woman. The only disturbance was the officer's own shouting. I felt a hot coil of anger tighten in my gut. I started to open my car door. Dad must have sensed it, because he gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head in my direction. "Stay put." It was an order. I obeyed. But my hands were clenched into fists. "Officer," my father said. Again, his tone still even, but with a new layer of steel in it. "We are here for a funeral, my wife's funeral. If you would just give us a moment." The officer was now right in front of him, puffing out his chest. "I'm not gonna tell you again, old man, move it. Now, you people always think the rules don't apply to you. You people." The words hung in the damp air, uglier and more violent than any curse word. The world seemed to stop. The drizzle, the quiet sobbing of a relative, the rustle of the leaves, it all faded away. There was only that phrase, that poison, directed at my father, who had served this country with more honor and integrity than this officer could probably comprehend. My father, who was standing here, his heart shattered, trying to lay his wife to rest. My dad's face, which had been a mask of patient grief, hardened. The lines around his eyes deepened. It was the look he got right before a storm, not a look of anger, but of immense, weary disappointment. He had seen this look in the eyes of men his whole life, in the segregated South of his childhood, in the faces of superior officers who doubted him early in his career, in the subtle and not so subtle ways the world reminded him that no matter how high he rose, some would only ever see the color of his skin. "Son," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have no idea who you're talking to." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of a lifetime of command. But the young officer heard it as a challenge. His face flushed a blotchy red. "Oh yeah? And who are you supposed to be?" He sneered. My father sighed, a deep, heavy sound that seemed to carry the sorrow of the entire day. He slowly reached into his suit jacket, a move he'd made 1,000 times, to get his wallet or his glasses. He never got there. The officer's training, or his prejudice, or his fear, took over. He unholstered his weapon. The click of the strap, coming undone, was like a gunshot in the silence. He drew his pistol and leveled it at my father's chest. "Don't you move," he screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Time didn't just slow down. It shattered into a million tiny, sharp pieces. My vision tunneled. All I could see was that gun, dark and menacing, pointed at the heart of the man who was my entire world. My father, a 4-star general, a man who had faced down enemy armies and stared into the face of death, was standing on a grassy hill at his own wife's funeral with a gun pointed at him by a boy in a uniform who saw him as nothing more than a threat. My father's hands went up slowly, palms out. There was no fear in his eyes. There was something far worse, a profound, soul-crushing sadness. It was the look of a man realizing that in this moment, in this place, none of it mattered. The stars, the service, the sacrifice. He was just another black man at the wrong end of a white man's gun. A collective gasp went through the crowd of mourners who were watching this nightmare unfold. My sister, Chloe, let out a strangled sob. I was out of the car before I even realized I had moved. "Dad," I yelled, my voice raw. "Get back in the car," Marcus, my father, commanded. his eyes never leaving the officers. "Put the gun down," someone shouted from the crowd. The officer was panicking now, his eyes wide, his gun hand trembling. He was into deep. "Everyone stay back. This man is non-compliant." It was all happening so fast, a slow-motion car crash, and then another car came squealing to a stop. This one was also a police cruiser, but it was a supervisor's car. The man who got out was older, thicker around the middle, with a face I recognized. It was Chief Brody, the town's police chief. He had known my family for years. He and my dad served on a local community board together. Chief Brody took in the scene in a split second, the crowd of mourners, my father with his hands in the air, and his own officer pointing a gun. The color drained from his face. "Miller," he roared, and his voice was the thunder that finally broke the spell. "What in the Sam Hill are you doing? Put your weapon down. Now." The young officer, Miller, flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked wildly from the chief to my father. "Chief, this man was causing a disturbance. He was threatening, Brody bellowed, storming forward. He wasn't looking at his officer anymore. He was looking at my father, and his face was a mask of pure horror and shame. "Miller, you monumentally ignorant fool. Do you have any idea who that is?" Brody didn't wait for an answer. He shoved past Miller and stood in front of my dad, effectively blocking the line of fire. "General," Brody said, his voice choked with emotion. "General Peterson, my God, I am so sorry." The word hung in the air. General. Officer Miller's jaw went slack. His gun hand dropped to his side, the weapon suddenly looking like a heavy, stupid toy. His eyes darted from the chief's frantic face to my father's calm, sorrowful one. He looked at the crowd of well-dressed people, the men in military dress uniforms now staring at him with undisguised contempt. He looked at the hearse and the flowers. The pieces clicked into place in his head, one by one, constructing a picture of the colossal, career-ending, soul-shattering mistake he had just made. "General," Miller whispered, the words sounding foreign and unbelievable on his tongue. My father slowly lowered his hands. He looked at Chief Brody, a man he knew, a man he had considered a colleague. Then he looked past him, at the terrified young officer. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was a judgment more damning than any shout. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was gravelly and low, scraped raw by grief and now by this profound, needless indignity. "Chief Brody," he said, "all I want is to bury my wife. Can you please just let us bury my wife?" The simple, heartbreaking plea broke through the anger and the shock. It brought us all back to why we were there. My mother, Eleanor, lying in her casket waiting. "Chief," Brody looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. He nodded, unable to speak. He turned on Miller, his face purple with rage. "Give me your weapon. Go wait in my car. Do not speak to anyone. Do not move. We will deal with this later." His voice was a low, vicious snarl. Miller, looking like a ghost, numbly handed his pistol to the chief and stumbled away, the eyes of 100 mourners burning into his back. Brody turned back to my father. "General, there are no words. I am ashamed. This never should have happened." My father just nodded once, a gesture of dismissal. The energy had gone out of him. The strong oak tree was swaying, badly damaged. He turned and walked back toward me and Chloe, his steps heavy. He put an arm around each of us, and we walked, a shattered little family, toward my mother's final resting place. The rest of the burial was a ghost of what it should have been. The pastor's words of comfort felt hollow. The 21-gun salute from the honor guard felt less like a tribute and more like an echo of the violence we had just witnessed. The ceremonial folding of the flag, presented to my father, was a moment of supreme, bitter irony. They were honoring a man for his service to a country that, just minutes before, had seen him as a threat worthy of a gun to the chest. As my father stood by the grave after everyone else had begun to disperse, he looked down at the folded flag. In his hands, he held it not like a sacred symbol, but like a heavy, complicated burden. The ride home was silent. The house felt even emptier than before. The casseroles were still on the counter, a mockery of normal life. We sat in the living room, the three of us, adrift in a sea of quiet. Chloe was crying softly. I was vibrating with a rage so deep it felt like it was going to tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. I wanted to find that officer and what? What could I do that would fix this? My dad just sat in his armchair, staring at nothing. Finally, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking, "are you okay?" It was a stupid question. Of course he wasn't okay. His wife was dead, and he had been humiliated in the most profound way possible. He turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were ancient. "I've been dealing with men like that my whole life, Marcus. But not like this," I shot back. "Not today, not now. He pulled a gun on you, Dad." "A gun? At Mom's funeral?" "Yes," he said, his voice flat. "He did. We have to do something. We have to sue him, the department, the city. We have to make sure he never wears a badge again. He can't get away with this." My voice was rising, fueled by a feeling of utter helplessness. My father held up a hand, and I fell silent. "Anger is a fire, son," he said, his voice gaining a little of its old strength. "You can use it to heat your home, or you can use it to burn your house down. You have to choose." "What choice is there?" I asked, exasperated. He saw a black man, and he saw a criminal. He didn't see a grieving husband. He didn't see a man. He sure as hell didn't see a four-star general. "No," my father agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. "He didn't. In that moment. All these," he gestured vaguely to his own chest, where for stars would have been on his uniform, "meant nothing. They were invisible." He stripped them away from me with a single look. In his eyes, I was just what he expected me to be. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I've told you stories about my early days, the barracks where I wasn't welcome, the commanders who gave me the worst assignments, hoping I'd fail, the promotions I had to fight twice as hard for as any of my white colleagues. I learned a long time ago that the uniform is armor, but it's not impenetrable, and sometimes you have to take it off. Today, I wasn't wearing it. I was just James Peterson, burying his Eleanor. And that man, that boy with a gun, he reminded me that for some people, James Peterson, the man, will always be a threat before he is anything else." The quiet wisdom of his words washed over me, dousing some of my rage and leaving a cold, hard sadness in its place. He wasn't surprised by what happened. He was just hurt. Hurt that it had happened on this day, of all days, that it had spoiled the memory of his final goodbye to the love of his life. "It's not right, Dad," Chloe said, her voice thick with tears. "It's just not right." "No, sweetheart, it's not," he said gently. "But righteousness is a mountain. You have to climb every single day. Some days, you make good progress. Some days, you slide all the way back down to the bottom. Today was a slide. But tomorrow, we get up and we start climbing again." Later that evening, Chief Brody came to the house. He stood on our porch, head in hand, looking like a man on his way to his own execution. My father let him in, but didn't invite him to sit. "General," Brody began, his voice strained, "I came to tell you personally, Officer Miller has been suspended indefinitely, pending termination. The internal investigation is a formality. He will not be a police officer in this town, or anywhere else if I have anything to say about it. His actions were inexcusable. They were a disgrace to the badge and to this community." My father listened, his face impassive. "There's a culture in some of these young officers," Brody stammered, trying to explain the inexplicable, a fear, an aggression. "We try to train it out of them, but sometimes, my father interrupted, his voice cutting through the excuses. "You can't train away what's in a man's heart. You can't train away his prejudice. You can only hope he has the character to overcome it. Your officer did not." Brody flinched. "No, sir, he did not. I've been chief for 15 years. I've never been more ashamed, to you of all people, a man who has done more for this country than." "This isn't about me being a general, Chief," Dad said, and his words were sharp and precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. "You should be just as ashamed if he had done this to any man. The janitor at the high school, the fella who bags your groceries, The stars on my shoulder shouldn't be what makes this wrong. It was wrong because he saw a man, a black man, and he decided that man's life was worth less than his own assumptions. It was wrong because he dishonored my wife's memory. That is all. Chief Brody stood there, thoroughly chastened. He just nodded. Yes, sir, you're right. He left a few minutes later, leaving a thick silence in his wake. In the week that followed, the story got out. It was in the local paper, then picked up by state news, then national outlets. Racist officer pulls gun at funeral. Doesn't know man was a 4-star general. The headline was everywhere. Our phone rang off. The hook. Reporters camped out at the end of our driveway. It was a spectacle, and it missed the entire point. The story wasn't that a cop pulled a gun on a general. The story was that he pulled a gun on a man. For no reason. My father's rank just made the injustice too obvious to ignore. It made it a headline. But how many times does this happen without the headline? How many times does it happen to the janitor or the grocery bagger? And no one ever hears about it. My dad ignored all of it. He refused all interviews. He asked for privacy. He spent his time in my mother's garden, pulling weeds, tending to her roses. It was his way of being with her. About 2 weeks after the funeral, he came to me one morning. Marcus, let's go fishing. It was our thing. Since I was a boy, fishing was how we talked. The quiet of the lake, the rhythmic casting, it loosened his tongue. We took our little boat out on Lake Lanier, the sun warm on our faces, for an hour. We didn't say anything, just baited our hooks and cast our lines into the still, green water. Finally, he spoke. You know, your mother hated fishing. I smiled. I know. She said it was hours of boredom punctuated by moments of slimy panic. He chuckled, a real, deep chuckle. It was the first time I'd heard it since she passed. The sound was like medicine. That's exactly what she'd say, he mused. But she always cooked whatever we caught, said it was her duty to make something good out of our foolishness. He reeled in his line and cast it out again. That's what we have to do now, son, he said, looking at me. We have to make something good out of this foolishness. What good could possibly come out of it? Dad, understanding, he said simply, for you. I've lived my life knowing this world is complicated. I learned how to navigate it. I built a fortress around myself with my reputation, my rank, my character. I thought it was impenetrable. What happened at the funeral? It showed me the fortress has a crack in it. It showed me that to some people, I'll never be inside the fortress. I'll always be outside the gates, asking to be let in. He looked out over the water, but that's not a reason to despair. It's a reason to build better gates, to build bridges. That young man, Officer Miller, his life is ruined. He made a terrible mistake, born of ignorance and fear, and he will pay for it. I don't feel joy in that. I just feel a great sadness for him, for all the boys like him, taught to fear what they don't understand. He turned to me, his eyes clear and focused. Your anger is justified, Marcus. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's not, but don't let it consume you. Use it. Use it in your classroom. When you see a kid who feels like an outsider, you make him feel welcome. When you see ignorance, you combat it with education. You don't have to be a general to fight a war. The most important wars are fought in the hearts of men. You're a teacher. You're on the front lines. A fish tugged on my line, and I began to reel it in. It was a small bass, glistening in the sun. As I took the hook out, my father watched me. Your mother would have been proud of you, Marcus, of the man you are. She would have been proud of you, Dad, I said, my voice thick. The way you handled yourself, with all that dignity. He shook his head. That wasn't dignity, son. That was just survival. The same way I've been surviving for almost 70 years. But you, your generation, I want you to do more than survive. I want you to live, fully, without fear. We stayed on the lake for a few more hours, talking about Mom, about my teaching, about everything and nothing. As we headed back to the shore, I looked at my father. The old oak tree was still standing. The lightning strike had left a deep, terrible scar, but new leaves were already starting to grow. He was still my hero, not because of the 4 stars on his shoulder, but because of the boundless, resilient grace in his heart. The world had tried to strip him of his humanity, and it had failed. His true armor wasn't the uniform, but a quiet strength that no bullet, no insult, no amount of ignorance could ever pierce. And I knew, in that moment, that my job was to help tend to that strength, for him, and to try and plant a little of it in the world myself.